And I'll take this opportunity to rise on the take note motion for the 23-24 budget papers. 3 months ago, the budget was delivered. A lot has changed actually in the budget since then, and I'll get to that in a minute. First, I'll start with just a few little bits and pieces from Nepean. In early debate, in another piece that was mentioned, he's not here anymore, but the member for Pascoe Vale said the budget was endorsed right across the state. Well, it certainly wasn't in Nepean, otherwise the previous member would still be sitting on the other side of the chamber. Look, for Nepean in the budget, there's a few bits and pieces in there. Obviously, some funding for some schooling funding. I note that there's some funding for Eastbourne Primary, some planning funding for Eastbourne Primary. Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Which is fantastic. Eastbourne Primary definitely in need of an upgrade. What I will say though, planning funding is not going to assist students. The school needs the funding to be delivered ASAP. You can't store your PE equipment in a plan or play on recess in a plan. You can't write or draw with a plan. While I do welcome the investment in funding, I want to see some action. Also, when you talk about schools, Rye Primary, a couple $100,000 for them, $42,000 in this budget. If a playground costs $200,000 to build and only $42,000 the first year, I'm not sure what the other $160,000 or when that is coming and how it's going to be used. I also note that there was $6.9 million across 4 projects in Victoria for piers. Now, Dramana Pier was promised $10 million at the last election. $6.9 million for 4 projects is a long way short of the $10 million this government promised for Dramana Pier. So I'm hoping that in future budgets, the rest of that funding will come through for the community in Dramana. I also note that the major projects that we advocated for during the election campaign down there, and some of the major projects that are desperately needed, those such as Rosebud Hospital, which I've mentioned numerous times in this chamber, didn't receive any funding in the budget. So healthcare, once again, neglected on the Southern Peninsula, as well as no funding for the Jetty Road overpass, which has had $75 million of federal funding sitting on the table for going on 5 years now. Still no funding to commit to that project for those constituents in the Rosebud and further Southern Peninsula area. I mean, it is a debacle of an intersection at the end of the freeway. I'm sure many members in the chamber from both sides have travelled that road at some stage and know that especially during the busy parts of the year, that intersection is in much need of an upgrade and the extension. Also no money for sound barriers down the Mornington Peninsula Freeway. It's one of the only metro freeways, and incredibly metro, but metro freeways left in Melbourne that doesn't have any noise abatement or anything to stop the sound, and those residents have been, since 2018 when studies were done by Vic Roads, living with noise that is well over the decibel threshold for actually something to be done, and actually is detrimental, and noise levels at that level has been shown to actually cause things like early dementia and Alzheimer's and the such. So I encourage the government to keep looking at doing something about those sound issues along the freeway. More broadly, we've seen in this budget an increase in taxes. When you think about the rental tax, the payroll tax, the schools tax, and this government has set a fairly ambitious housing agenda that they keep talking about, but when you start to look at sending houses or trying to help those people who need houses, either affordable places to buy or to rent, increasing land tax on properties for those, and I've got 5,500 odd properties on the long-term rental market, and I will say that on the Southern Peninsula, the Airbnb versus long-term rental situation is a delicate one. I have a huge number of Airbnb properties that do drive a lot of that tourism industry that my community so much relies on. But when you have 5,500 rentals at the moment, and you talk about the Airbnbs, driving land taxes up, which those landlords are just going to pass on to their renters, is not going to drive more houses to the long-term market. It's actually going to turn people away from putting their houses on the long-term market as they try to recover some of the losses that they've made and when you talk about interest rate rises and those sort of things, an extra tax on those people is not going to send any more properties back to the long-term rental market. We've already seen other states since the budget poaching and pitching for business to take their interests interstate. We've seen South Australia and Tasmania both pitching because of the extra tax on payroll to say, come do business in our state, send business over here, we'll look after you, it's going to cost you less. We don't want to see that. We don't want to see business leaving this state. We want to make this state the best place to do business, not by increasing their taxes, but encouraging people. We shouldn't be taxing payroll. We shouldn't be putting an extra tax on jobs. We should be doing everything we can to make it an attractive place to grow your business, to employ more people, not the other way around. The big one that we've seen over the last few weeks, and it was mentioned in the budget papers only to be 8 weeks later cancel, the Commonwealth Games. How you can do a budget that budgets $2.6 billion for Commonwealth Games and 8 weeks later see an increase of up to $5 billion and see all of a sudden a price tag of $7 billion for something that was going to be a 12-day event. And having had lots of conversations with ministers and the department and briefings over the last few weeks since that cancellation, I'm not sure the government has a plan on how they're planning to get out of this in any way that's going to deliver for regional Victoria. We hear about $1 billion for housing and the department not taking any responsibility and handing that off to somebody else and saying, well, we're still working through those. I'm not sure how they're going to deliver what is supposed to be 14 sporting legacy projects across those regional hubs that we've now, in the last few days, been told it will have a price tag of around $500 million, but as long as those projects meet the budget, they will be delivered. So there's no guarantee on those projects what level they're going to be delivered to. Are they going to be delivered to an international level standard like they were going to for the Games, or are they going to be wound back now to fit within what the government calls an infrastructure legacy spend? There is a lot of questions around that. I mean, for these communities, I think we have to be listening to them, and I understand there were certain projects that would have had to be delivered for the Commonwealth Games that would have made sense because we were delivering at Games. But now we need to go back to those communities and make sure that they are being given pieces of legacy infrastructure that they actually need. I'm glad we have an expert on the other side of this, because it is incredible. It is incredible that the member would. It is incredible that the member knows when yesterday the department themselves doesn't know what they are doing. So if the member has information that the department doesn't, I would be incredibly keen to hear what that information is, because the department says they don't have that information yet. Can I continue? You excited? Sounds it.
Through the chair.
Sorry, Deputy Speaker.
Without assistance.
Look, overall, I mean, this is an awful budget for Victoria. If this government hadn't have blown the budget and got our debt out to 170 odd million, we're paying $15 million a day in debt. It's going to rise to $22 million a day. I'd love all of the members on the other side just to acknowledge what their communities could do with $15 million a day. $15 million a day in 1 month in my community would build the hospital, would build the intersection, would build the pier, would fix Flinders Pier, would fix the roads with the potholes, would build every school that we need to be fixed. I mean, if they cannot acknowledge that their financial mismanagement has driven this state to a place where we cannot afford to build things, we cannot afford to deliver events that we've committed to. If those on the other side think that we are doing things well in this state with the current level of debt, then I think they need to go take a good hard look in the mirror. And I think this budget it is one of the worst budgets this state has ever seen. And while there are little bits for my community in there, there is a lot missing, and I think there is a lot more to be done.